You are listening to Bantha Tracks.
We recorded 10 minutes. I didn't hit record. So I'm now hitting record, which is good.
Easier to chop it out than it is to start again.
That's what they tell me.
Fast ship. Never heard of it, William Paul?
Should I?
It's a ship that made the Kessel run in less than 12 parsecs.
What a piece of junk.
Covering Star Wars vehicles in less than 12 parsecs, this is Start Your Engines.
Don't get technical with me.
Here are your hosts, Paul Naylor and Mark Newbold.
You're listening to Start Your Engines. I'm your co-host, Mark Newbold, and joining me today is a man who would make the best skiff guard in the entire galaxy if he didn't hate sand. It's Paul Naylor. How you doing, man?
It gets everywhere, mate. It absolutely gets everywhere.
I hate sand too, so I don't go anywhere near it.
I'm good, mate. I'm good. How are you?
I'm good, and I'm looking forward to talking about these two vehicles. We're going to talk about the sail barge and the skiff. The first time you saw, let's pick the sail barge. It's so different to anything we'd ever seen before. What were your first impressions when you first saw the sail barge in Jedi?
Well, I suppose my first memory of it really would be in the original trailer where Luke had still got a blue lightsaber, if you remember that. So I don't think in that trailer we got an actual overall impression of what this barge was like. But we could tell he was outside fighting on something. So that was probably the first glimpse of the barge. And I think I was just excited to see Luke again in action with a lightsaber. I do think, though, that they did make the right decision in changing the colour of that. And I think I'm right in saying it was primarily because of those scenes on Tatooine that they decided to go with a green blade rather than a blue because of how it showed up against the sky.
It's become such a thing, though, hasn't it? Ignite the green. It's like, you can't imagine him not with a green saber.
It was like progression, I suppose, wasn't it?
Yeah.
We all know why he lost his blue one, and then it came back miraculously. But I do think that the scene where the jeopardy of being over the top of the Sarlacc pit, R2 firing the saber into the air and then Luke igniting it, that was a way better introduction of that particular lightsaber than the scene that they shot with 3PO, R2 and Luke in the cave with him tinkering with the Holt and then sort of igniting it. As cool as that would have been, and we've all seen that scene in isolation. What do you prefer? Do you prefer the blue blade or the green?
I prefer the green. I think I'm so used to it now. And I think the logic of what you said is quite correct. And also that first poster you saw of Jedi with the hand, which is George Lucas's hand, holding the saber, and that's the cover of the book. You know, that's a blue saber. And it still makes sense because Luke had a blue saber, which was Anakin's saber. But in terms of Jedi, and then later on, decades later on in Mandalorian, you know, when you see with that green lightsaber, it's so special. And of course, we'd had the prequel trilogy since then, in which Obi-Wan's got a blue saber, but Qui-Gon's got a green saber, and then Mace has got the purple one, which was always he was the one different, you know, saber color, wasn't he? Because it was hate.
Well, George said, didn't he? He says the good guys have blue or green, and the bad guys have red. But he's Samuel L. Jackson. He can do what he wants. You know, he's mostly good, but there's a bit of bad in there. Like,
but we've gone off on a tangent already. We haven't even started talking about the ship.
The question you asked me about first impressions and first recollections. One of my sort of enduring recollections, and I don't know whether it was the first time that I saw it, but it was that Ralph McQuarrie picture where you've got Han and Luke wearing basically blue shirts and dark vests, and the Khetanna sort of like coming out towards you in almost like a 3D picture. That sticks in the mind. I mean, it just looks such a hunk of junk, doesn't it? I mean, the Falcon's got that nickname, but this thing just almost looks like a whale. It almost feels like it's alive. There's been the vintage collection toy that you could get through crowdfunding, which is now worth an absolute fortune.
It's a beautiful looking vehicle. I wonder the colour of it. You think of the sandblasted colour of it, so much like a sandcrawler. So I always think they've got that similar sort of vibe. The first time I remember seeing it was exactly the same as you. It was that McQuarrie painting. It was in an issue of Bantha Tracks that just gave you an early flavour. And of course, we've just come off Star Wars and Empire, which came fairly close together here in the UK. And then we had that long wait for Jedi with all the Marvel comics in between that teased us and did such a brilliant job of getting us excited for Jedi, along with, you know, all the other stuff that we had to play with. But that vehicle was so unique. The Khetanna is a modified luxury sail barge, 3 decks, So the upper one had the orange sails. They were mostly decorative, but they could be used for propulsion if the main engines gave out for whatever reason. Had a triple-chambered repulsor lift engine. And so the vehicle has all sorts of stuff in it. We know, as you've just mentioned, from the Vintage Collection Hasbro sail barge, which was pretty much to scale. There's all sorts of stuff inside. Obviously, the banqueting room. Jabba's got his own area. There's a passenger deck. It's all beautifully ornate. And so it all sort of comes together to give you this really unique vehicle. And when you first see it going over the sands of Tatooine, especially, I think they did a good job in the special edition, when you see that herd of Banthas. And then
that was a nice addition, wasn't it?
It really was. And you just see the sailboats coming over that dune, and then it cuts to the original version. You can hear that music playing, just perfectly set up.
The fact that it's part of a production run that were used as what? They were used... Yeah?
It was a modified luxury sail barge. So you've got to imagine there's other versions of the Khetanna. I mean, this one ended up on Tatooine. If you saw that vehicle on other worlds... Maybe if it was on Hoth, let's say, it wouldn't be that battered.
Nice white paint to it or something.
Exactly. So maybe things would be a little bit different.
Manufacturer.
Ubrikkian Industries, it was their custom vehicles division, and its model was a luxury class sail barge. A cost to buy one of these things, brand new, 285,000 credits. That's not cheap, but when you look at what you get for that, all those different decks, all the different options, it would be a worthwhile thing to buy for, let's say, a crime boss on a desert planet, doesn't it?
It's also interesting. It's produced by the same company that made the little pod that was sat outside the cantina, which in the later years has been sort of attributed to being Greedo's speeder. That's a Ubrikkian 3000.
Weird, isn't it? It makes you wonder, these massive manufacturing corporations. I mean, so many vehicles that get made are credited to Corellian Engineering and places like that. And then, a lot of the other companies that made Imperial vehicles also made Rebel vehicles. There's fleets of vehicles that are made by companies that you go from that Ubrikkian that Greedo is attributed to, as you say, right up to a sail barge and beyond. It's a massive scope.
It is nice to see that name come up again, though, because more often than not, we hear of them being built on Corellia.
Yeah.
You wouldn't want everything being built there, would you?
Not everything.
Technical specifications.
30 metres in length, so it's a sizable vessel.
Maximum atmospheric speed.
30 kilometres per hour with its sails alone, and 100 kilometres an hour powered with the repulsors. So it's not the fastest vehicle in the world. It can move, but not massively. Its flight ceiling, maximum altitude, 10 metres, so it can only get 30 foot above the sand. Wow. So it is definitely built specifically for these kind of purposes.
Land vehicle. Yeah. Okay.
It's just a big land speeder, isn't it? Jabba himself said that he couldn't imagine being a Hutt and not having such a vehicle. So it does feel very sort of intrinsically tied to being a Hutt kind of thing, a luxury sail barge. It very much plays into his MO of opulence, and even though it's sort of grim and grimy, snotty-nosed opulence that Hutts seem to have, it's very much in with what he would want.
Have we seen them appear in any other Star Wars media? I
don't recall either, and just going through the research for this, I don't remember seeing anything else unless it just didn't catch my eye. I don't remember seeing it. I know when we talked about the cloud cars, for example, there's other mod versions of cloud cars for other locations. And that's the case for a lot of vehicles, isn't it? The snow speeder is an air speeder refitted for Hoth. You kind of think that a lot of vehicles would be outfitted for different locations. It kind of feels like something Dryden Voss could own, doesn't it? But he would paint it black and just make it look sexy and gorgeous.
Hi, this is Dave Chapman, and you're listening to Fantha Tracks.
When Jabba got hold of it, he installed a custom-mounted laser cannon on the upper deck. That really plays into the film, especially near the end sequence when Luke and Leia are leaving and swinging them on board the skiff. It doesn't look like it's going to massively defend itself against attack, but nevertheless, it does have these other two skiffs that are riding with it to give it some sort of protection.
And the skiffs, for me, probably stood out more than the actual barge, mainly because the main characters, they were in focus on that one skiff. And seeing them whiz past it and sort of circle it, cheering and stuff as they went past.
But there's always that ad hoc feeling about the characters in Jabba's palace, because they're kind of pirates. I mean, I know in The Mandalorian, they and certainly with Skeleton Crew coming up, they've kept that pirate vibe. Yeah. And you look back to Jedi, and it is that pirate vibe. They're not organised in the sense of, an Imperial outfit would be organised or a Rebel outfit will be organised. It's a bit more ad hoc than that. Like you just said, when you see those skiffs going around, it's like, this is a process. This is a plan. They know what they're doing. They're not just swinging around to look cool.
Wouldn't it be cool, though, if something like the Khetanna or some of the skiffs now turn up in Skeleton Crew?
That would be awesome. I've got such high hopes for that show.
I'm skeptical, but I'm wanting to be pleased. So
Yes.
I'm hoping it's really good. Big fan of Jude Law. I think he's a good actor. But I think with that being like a pirate style show, and the fact that Han Solo was often referred to as a space pirate, and that clearly Jabba's denizen on Tatooine was made up of a bunch of bounty hunters and piratey type of characters, that would hint that this sort of thing as a sail barge or a skiff wouldn't look out of place with Vane.
That's very true. I've got my fingers crossed now you said it.
Yeah.
Because we haven't seen it in many other places. It kind of feels like such a cool vehicle.
I'd not thought about it till now, but I'm actually quite excited to see whether that happens now.
Engine specs.
It has a powerful set of engines. It has a 3-chamber repulsor lift engine, the Carry D KD57.
Armament.
More than you probably remember, it has a CEC Me-7 heavy repeating dual blaster laser cannon, which is sitting on the deck, which is the one that Luke and Leia kick the firing mechanism on to blow the thing up.
Yeah.
And it has 20 mounted on handrails, CEC GI-9 anti-personnel laser cannons. So you do see one of those get slotted in as they start shooting at the sail barge. It says 20, but I imagine there must be 20 ports to put them on if they need it. So saying that big main CEC ME-7 can't defend it much, it clearly can. I bet that's a bit like the ground cannons on the Death Star shooting at X-Wings and 1 in 100 shots hits. But if you've got 20 mounted laser cannons on the side all around the handrails, that's like having TIE fighters defending a ship, isn't it?
I've never really noticed those. I do recall seeing the one being snapped into position. But the one thing that I always remember, obvious moment where there's one of the Weequay, Luke's sort of jumped across from the skiff onto the barge, and a Weequay suddenly appears through a flap in the side, almost like an escape hatch kind of thing. I can imagine all those can open. I don't know whether they did have any gun mounts for those, but that would have been an ideal place to have some.
It does feel malleable enough that they could change things around and move things about if they wanted to. But I also get the sense that at this point of time, Jabba doesn't get attacked much. There's kind of an arrogance about the whole situation that they're thinking, we're just going to take these guys out into the desert, drop them down the throat of the Sarlacc and fly away. And that's it.
It's a party cruise, isn't it?
Crew complement.
It has a crew of 26. It can carry, and I was amazed at this, 500 passengers. So that party deck, if you want to call it that, and the top deck, I mean, it's a 3-decked vehicle. There's a lot of capacity for passengers.
Cargo capacity.
It can carry 2,000 metric tons of cargo as well. It's a transport, and obviously its main affiliation is the Hutts. I do think, and I agree with you, it would be so cool to see this in other locations and other scenarios with other owners and other operations possibly using it. Here, you feel like it gets taken out to the pit of Carcoon. Jabba might not always be on board. You know, you always get the sense Jabba pretty much tends to stay in the palace. Yeah. So this was a treat for him to kill a Jedi. This is the reason that's got him off his butt and moved into the sail barge, which I guess wouldn't be much fun. I don't know if at that point of Jedi he's still sliding around like he did in Star Wars around Docking Bay 94.
My takeaway from that is the fact that you called it a treat to kill a Jedi.
Oh, yeah.
Now, there's the title for a novel that needs to be written.
For everything in one location, daily news, reviews, interviews, podcasts, video, and social media feeds, bookmark Bantha-tracks.com for Star Wars news 24/7, 365.
We looked at the sail barge, which had, in Return of the Jedi, 2 ancillary vehicles, 2 Bantha-II cargo skiffs, also built by Ubrikkian Industries. In that show, in that film, they tend to get as much, if not more, screen time than the actual sail barge because they're that much smaller and they're flying around it. I bought recently the Jazzwares skiff and was surprised once you put the figures in, actually how small the skiff was. It looks like it's really sizable, but actually it's not. They're quite nippy compared to the skiff. They can move a lot more. But again, same question as before with the sail barge. What were your first sort of recollections of seeing those skiffs?
In the film itself, in the special edition, they're a lot smoother. They're a lot better, aren't they? Because the special effects at the time, back in 82, when they were putting it together, when you saw the people walking around on them, it was a bit clunky. It was a bit Ray Harryhausen.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah, it was.
but that was
It really
obviously smoothed out in time. They were great little ships, and to me, they were more memorable than the actual sail barge itself. By the time I was out of collecting as a youngster, so I would have been about 13, 14. I don't think the skiff had come out at that stage. That was quite a late addition to the line, wasn't it?
It was. I think if I remember, that was a Power of the Force release.
Yes, it was. Yeah,
quite a bit later on. Yeah.
Yeah. Prior to that, we'd had the one-man skiff, which was a mini rig, which was like a cross between a skiff and the sail barge. It got a little red sail on it.
That's right.
I think it stuck in the mind more because the main characters were on there. You got Han, Luke, Chewie, and obviously Lando was on there in disguise as well.
Yeah.
And then there was a secondary one as well. There was stuff going on between the two skiffs, wasn't there? It was one that I always wanted as a kid. I was a bit disappointed that it came out beyond my early collecting years.
I think with Jedi, more than Star Wars and Empire, weirdly, you felt as a kid, not that we were collectors, we were playing with them and setting them up in dioramas and such, but you look at back as a kid and it felt like with Jedi, there was so many more things. And there was so many more characters in Jedi and different things that you could get. And they were pretty quick. I mean, the TIE Interceptor was out pretty quick. The B-Wing was out pretty quick, but the A-Wing was quite a bit later on. There's things that you wanted to see that didn't come out as quickly as you wanted them to. And as you kind of allude to, a lot of the audience that got so hooked on Star Wars were kind of aging out by the time of Jedi, which seems crazy now because we ain't aging out of it until we're in a box. But, then we kind of were because other things were coming into our lives. The skiff, I think now, if they'd have done a skiff or a bit of cartoon playset or something, when Empire came out, you had your Rebel base, you had your Imperial base, you had Dagobah set, Cloud City. I think there might have been some Sears stuff, but there was nothing really on the nose.
No, there was that awkward boxy cardboard one, wasn't there? That wasn't very good with the carbon freezing chamber on top.
Yeah, Jedi had so much cool stuff. This vehicle's actually more malleable than you think because it was built to be modified to use for local conditions on any given planet. So most of the modifications had your top deck and a pilot station. The repulsors were on that top deck as well. You're going to get rained on if you're on a watery planet. You're going to get cold, or you're going to get sweat your butt off if you're on a desert planet, as they are. But nevertheless, there were aquatic skiffs which had retractable rain screens. So the skiffs are designed more to be changed for other locations than maybe a sail barge is, because a lot of the sail barge, 2 of the decks at least, are undercover. They're within the vehicle. If
you try to sort of draw real life comparisons to what these vehicles were, your sail barge was almost like a cruise ship, whereas these were like little speedboat ships, weren't they, really? Yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
Manufacturer.
This was also manufactured by Ubrikkian Industries. It was a Bantha-II. It was a repulsor craft cargo skiff. Brand new one of these, 3,000 credits used, 8,000 credits new. I didn't realise as well that there were specific specifications for civilian versions and for military versions.
Technical specifications.
It's 9.2 to 9.5 metres long.
Maximum atmospheric speed.
Top speed of 250 kilometres an hour and a top flight ceiling of 50 metres. But if you have a civilian version, there's no armament. If you bought the militarised version, there was 3 blaster turrets. And similarly for the crew, 1 pilot for military or civilian, that was the same. 3 gunners if it was militarised, of course, because of the 3 weapons that are on board.
Crew complement.
It can carry 16 passengers and carry 135 tons. So there's a lot to unpack there. I can't imagine this vehicle as a military vehicle, in the way that we see Jabba and his cronies, if you like, using it pretty much for what it was for. And it never felt like they were threatened that much. So they wouldn't really need the armament or that many turrets to protect themselves, because just the heft and threat of, hey, you're attacking Jabba the Hutt. Do you really want to do that? That always felt like that was the best defensive shields that you could ever want.
I just saw these as escort vehicles, really. When the Walking the Plank came out, they were sort of escort vehicles, but with a purpose, and that purpose was purely to execute a Jedi, and no doubt a smuggler and a Wookiee as well. Did they have weapons on them? Were those the military versions of them?
That was the military versions, yes. Yeah. I mean, it says they could be operated as transports or pleasure craft. That top deck where you see all the characters, obviously in Jedi, they could fit in 16 seats. So you've got to imagine there's probably secure areas or maybe magnetic seats. I don't know. There was other things, there was fasteners and magnetic fasteners, cargo straps if it was a cargo transport.
Yeah.
So you could see that being used at starports and spaceports to transport stuff.
Yeah.
But also, like you say, if you put 16 seats on it and send it out, it's a bit like being on the Everglades in one of those big rotor boats, isn't it? You know, if you go out looking at the local wildlife.
They missed a design trick with that, didn't they?
They did. So there's numerous usages for this, but I was surprised how much cargo it could carry, you know, 135 tons. It's got a day's worth of consumables. I mean, you would probably imagine there's probably hatches you could lift up on the deck plates to carry stuff. And it's restricted in availability, so it's not something you see a lot. You wouldn't see one of these, for example, you would imagine, on somewhere like Coruscant, because that is definitely built for the elevations, and this can only go to 50 meters. So maybe there's some way down in the grubbiest, grimiest parts of Coruscant, but probably not.
Again, it would be nice to see this vehicle somewhere else, wouldn't it? In another country.
Yeah, I can't imagine where. It does mention the water, the aquatic versions. You could imagine it again on a snow world or just regular planets. And I wonder again, you know, the colour of it, they match each other perfectly, the sail barge and the skiff. Would it be the same? Would it look the same if it was somewhere else? You probably imagine it wouldn't. If you saw one of these flying around on Alderaan, you could imagine it would suit. It has got some ornate, the side fins that sit at the back. They're quite gorgeous, and you can imagine that would fit in very nicely.
It's got like a sort of Baroque kind of feel to it, and very, very similar to the helmet that Lando wears. So it's like the skiff guard uniform goes with the skiff.
And I also wonder whether or not all that design, you know, you see all the carvings and such in Jabba's palace with all the details, and there's stuff like that on board the sail barge. And so there is a design thing going on, as you say, with the skiff helmet that Lando wears and other elements. Does that come from Hutt culture? Is that an amalgamation of various cultures? Is it something that Jabba just co-opted when he took the palace? I'd love to know where the history and the lineage of all these designs come from.
Yeah, I'd like to think it's Hutt culture, but it could just be something that Jabba was into personally himself. I seem to recall when the film version of the Clone Wars TV series, towards the end of the film, where you see the surroundings seem to blend very much with that kind of aesthetic. So maybe it is a Hutt culture thing.
Hi, this is John Morton from The Empire Strikes Back, and you're listening to Bantha Tracks.
Well, we've dived into two of the most interesting vehicles from Return of the Jedi. We'll definitely be going back to Jedi because there's so much to delve into there. But for now, I think we've nicely encapsulated what these vehicles were all about. And just as a final sign-off, when you think back to that era, specifically those sequences at the start of Return of the Jedi, these two vehicles are so front and center. Where would you rank these vehicles? If you're looking at ground vehicles, certainly in Star Wars, these have both got to be right up high up in the conversation, haven't they?
They're the type of vehicle that, until prompted, you'd almost dismiss. And I think that, in a way, is a good thing, because although they are sizable, once your attention's drawn to them and say, oh, you know, don't dismiss the skiff and don't dismiss the sail barge, they were the first third of that film.
Yeah.
You can't imagine the jeopardy of Luke and the rest of the guys without those contraptions. They were brilliant for giving Jabba something other than being either on the ground, as we saw him in the newer, later version of A New Hope, or just sat on his throne. Until that scene had been added to A New Hope, I think we only ever really imagined him being on a throne until we then see him then on the transport in Jeddah. It gave Jabba some mobility and therefore gave him the ability to go and track down somebody if he needed to. I genuinely thought, well, this guy, all he can do is just sit there on his throne. So he needs something to propel him around. So by having that as his pleasure craft, shall we say, essential that was in the film to give Jabba more power. The skiffs themselves, it's one vehicle that should have come out early on in the Return of the Jedi wave. I mean, bearing in mind the first wave of Jedi figures was 17 figures, and there was a big proportion of that was Jabba's aliens.
Yes.
It would have made sense to have brought something out to have gone along with the Jabba playset. It was very Endor heavy, the Return of the Jedi figure wave.
I totally agree. I'm so glad that, as we mentioned, Vintage Collection got their sail barge out through HasLab recently, or within the last 5 years, and now Lego are doing it. Jazzwares have released their skiffs, which are gorgeous, and I'm really hoping that they bite the bullet and do a sail barge at some point as well.
Yeah.
But it's so cool to see these vehicles from a classic movie. Thanks for listening to Start Your Engines. If you want to be a part of the action and stay updated on all the latest Star Wars news, visit Banthatracks.com and be sure to comment, like and share on any of our social media feeds at Banthatracks. You can reach out to us and send in your listeners' questions by emailing radio@fanthatracks.com. Subscribe, leave a review, preferably a 5-star one, on Amazon Music, Audible, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcatcher or smart speaker of choice. And as always, thanks to James Semple for composing the Fantha Tracks intro and our Start Your Engines opening music, Mark Daniel and Vanessa Marshall for our voiceovers, and of course the data miners at Wikipedia. Remember to tune in to Good Morning Tatooine. It's live Sunday evenings at 9 o'clock UK time, 4 PM Eastern and 1 PM Pacific on Facebook, YouTube and Twitch. And check out our Fantha Tracks Radio Friday night rotation. It's every Friday night at 7 o'clock UK time for new episodes of The Fantha from Down Under, Planet Leia, Desert Planet Discs, Start Your Engines, Collecting Tracks, Cannon Fodder, and special episodes of Making Tracks, and every Tuesday at 7 o'clock UK time for your weekly episode of Making Tracks.
Coming up next on Fantha Tracks Radio, it's Making Tracks.
Oh no.
Yeah, sorry.